Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to hear what would happen if Sakura took her training seriously. If you enjoy the episode, please like, comment, and subscribe for more similar content to come. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 1, Rip off those rose-tinted glasses, darling. Begin. Sakura had mixed feelings about the academy. On one hand, being a student gave her access to way more information than she would have had otherwise. The library at the school was immense, and that wasn't even accounting for the classes and lectures themselves. She would gladly listen for hours on end, greedily soaking up as much knowledge as possible. It didn't hurt that she excelled at their theory lessons either. On the other hand, there were days like today, where all of Sakura's carefully curated knowledge was as useful as wet parchment. She grimaced in sympathy as Ami took a knee to the gut from Shino. They were the farthest thing from friends, but she knew what it was like to be on the wrong side of a fight with a clan kid. Fridays were almost always spent outside, usually split between target practice, sparring, and outdoor survival training. It wasn't like Sakura didn't understand why they did. Obviously, they couldn't properly learn how to throw a punch or a shuriken through explanations alone, but, well, to put it bluntly, Sakura sucked. Maybe that was a bit of an exaggeration, but she did lag behind and was painfully aware of it. Her class was filled with clan kids, and, as this was their final year of the academy, she was the only civilian-born left. There had been 6 of them when she had first started. 2 had dropped the first year, and a third had left because of family pressure. The last ones had been held back a year because they hadn't been able to keep up. They had never really been close friends, but there had been this sense of camaraderie. Shared eye rolls when the others bragged, slipped bandages when one of them was purposefully tripped, whispered advice when one of them exceeded at the subject. Now it was just her. Of all the practical exercises, she was worst during the sparring matches. Throwing konao and shuriken wasn't easy, but it was one of the few things she could practice in her own backyard, and Sakura had always been a fast learner. Her katas were always precise and clean, and while she didn't have very good stamina, she was able to keep her running time within passing range. Survival training was just a lot of common sense and memorization. Sparring, however, was something else entirely. Sakura didn't have the advantages her fellow classmates did. She had no one at home to practice with, and the chances of a random shinobi deciding to help a mediocre civilian-born academy student were slim to none. Even the other clanless kids had shinobi parents to help them out. She didn't have Kiba's wild ferocity, or Shino's calculated movements. She wasn't graceful like Ino, or timid yet skillful like Hinata. She didn't have Naruto's seemingly endless stamina, or Chuji's heavy punches, or even Shikamaru's lazy strategies. Sakura had herself. And it was becoming increasingly clear that it wasn't enough. It would be accurate to say that Sakura lost more than she won sparring matches. In fact, she lost most of her matches. She never won against the clan kids, only managing to beat those with shinobi parents. It didn't matter if it was a taijutsu-only match, because they had specialized styles and hours more practice, and don't get her started if jutsu were allowed. Sakura was always caught between anger and tears when she saw everything her classmates could do that she couldn't. It felt like playing cards with access to only half the deck. Even when she went to the tutoring sessions the academy offered, nothing seemed to get better. The only thing they helped with was class material, and it felt like everyone else had skills outside of what they were taught at the academy. It was frustrating, to say the least. She watched as Shino and Ami finished their fight, the former winning as he put her in a ruthless pin she couldn't get out of. Disengage. Irika ordered, motioning for the two to separate. Ami scrambled back with a sneer, ignoring the Shino's offered hand. Don't touch me, bug boy. You seem uncomfortable. Why? Because you do not like the insects my clan hosts in their body. She scoffed. Figure that out all by yourself, did you? Irika bopped them both on the head. That's enough of that. Ami, you need to work on your stamina. You still get much sloppier when you're tired. Shino, drawing a fight out may have worked this time, but in most instances it's better to finish the fight as quickly as possible so not to attract attention and prevent collateral damage. The two accepted their criticisms, one with less grumbling than the other, and went back to where the rest of their class was sitting. Next, Sakura and Suzuki. She froze. It wasn't exactly a secret that she had a crush on Suzuki. Kami, most of the girls in their class did. Some of the boys too. He was cute, and easily the best fighter in their class. Not to mention he was the second heir of the Uchiha, one of, if not the most powerful clan in Konoha. He was also one of the few people in their class that Sakura had to work hard to outperform in theory. If she were less of a bookworm, he'd probably have her beat. She'd learned her lesson about asking him out. The first brutal rejection had been more than enough, thank you very much, but that didn't mean she couldn't admire from afar. And normally, afar meant way further away than across the ring of a sparring match. Yeah, there was no way she was winning this fight. Still, Sakura squared her shoulders and made her way to the ring where Sasuke was already waiting. His dark eyes were fixated on her, making her heart stutter in her chest. No jutsu or weapons. Begin. Sasuke immediately darted forward, hand clenched into a fist that she was just barely able to avoid. Sakura attempted to counter with a blow to the gut, but he danced away on light feet. Sasuke was fast, and most definitely stronger than her, which meant that going on offense would end badly. Well, more badly than this was already going to go. She had no illusions about winning this fight. Sakura ducked under his kick, but wasn't able to avoid the elbow to the face that followed it. Her head jerked to the side, but she managed to slip her ankle in front of his, tripping him and forcing him to back away or fall flat on his face. They separated once more, and Sakura resisted the urge to wipe the bit of blood that had trickled from her nose. The second time they clashed, Sasuke came at her with a flurry of punches that made pain explode from her abdomen and face. He was too fast for her to block everything, so instead she resigned herself to taking the hits, and there. Sasuke had overextended himself just enough that she was able to grab his wrist. It wasn't to flip him, but rather make his retreat more difficult as she slammed her fist into his floating ribs once, twice. And suddenly she was on her back, struggling to breathe with an uncomfortable weight on her chest. Disengage, came Irika's firm voice, and Sakura no longer felt as though she were about to be crushed. Gingerly picking herself up, Sakura wasn't quite able to keep the grin off her face. She'd managed to hit Sasuke in a taijutsu match. Twice. That was more than over half of the class had been able to accomplish. Sakura, good job utilizing your knowledge on your opponent. I don't recommend using a tactic like that in the field, especially against someone more than willing to kill you, but your strategy was sound. Sasuke she forced herself to tamp down on her beaming. You underestimated Sakura and you paid for it? If she had had a knife or a jutsu in hand, she could have killed you. Not that she would have. Sakura still felt weird hitting people with her full strength, the idea of killing someone seemed beyond her. Sasuke's lip curled into a sneer. She's not even close to being a threat, so why would I treat her like one? Sakura's smile froze in place. She's civilian born, the most she'll ever amount of is a paper chunin, and that's if she even graduates. Why would I waste effort on someone like that? Irika's eyes narrowed dangerously. That is enough, he said firmly. Ignoring that fact that assumptions like that will get you killed in the field, Sakura is your classmate and deserves your respect. Sasuke scoffed. Respect? Even if she makes it onto the field, she'll never be anything but cannon fodder. Look at her. How will she ever be a shinobi? Sakura felt paralyzed, shock and hurt coursing through her as the Sasuke's words registered. She'd known Sasuke hadn't been especially fond of her, he didn't pay her any attention, but that was how he treated everyone. She hadn't thought that this was how he'd really thought of her. It's stupid to pretend otherwise. Tears began to form in Sakura's eyes, but she refused to shed them. She wouldn't cry in front of the whole class. She wouldn't. Shut up, Sasuke. Don't be mean to Sakura like that. The sudden shout startled her, causing her to turn and face the rest of their classmates. Sasuke rolled his eyes. You're even more useless than she is, dead last. Naruto crossed his arms. I'm gonna be Hokage one day, so watch it. As the two continued to squabble, she met the eyes of another blonde, blue-eyed classmate. Ino was as beautiful as always. There wasn't a hair out of place, despite the fact that she'd had her own sparring match against Shuji. Sakura didn't know what she was expecting when she met Ino's gaze. They had been friends once, best friends, but that had been before they'd both started liking Sasuke and been torn apart. Even now that Sakura had given up on pursuing Sasuke, they were left in a strange limbo. Still insulting each other, still competing for top marks, but not really enemies. Not friends either. Sakura didn't really know what they were now. She looked surprised at what Sasuke had said. If Sakura looked hard enough, she thought she might have even seen a hint of anger. But she didn't say anything, and after a beat, Ino looked away. Enough. Sakura flinched at Irika's booming voice. Naruto, Sasuke, after school detention. Sasuke scowled. For what? For harassing a fellow classmate and delaying the lesson. Go back to your seats. It was not a suggestion. Sasuke turned to look at her. Really, look at her. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, a look of disgust on his face. It's not like I said anything that wasn't true. That was all Sakura could take. She turned on her heel, fists clenched and eyes burning. I'm going to the bathroom. She managed to choke out, not even waiting for Irika to give her permission. She just needed to leave. The bathroom was mercifully empty, allowing Sakura to cry without fear of witnesses. Even after outgrowing most of her shyness thanks to her former friendship with Ino, she had been bullied for too long to completely erase her of the feeling of constant judgment. Or maybe it wasn't just a feeling. Maybe she was being constantly judged. Sasuke sure seemed to have had more than a few things to say about her. Cannon fodder. Was that really what they thought about her? That she would be a human meat shield, destined to be thrown out to protect someone more important? The anger was late coming, but cleansing. She furiously wiped her tears away and splashed water on her face. Cannon fodder? Paper Chuyunin? Sakura was going to make him and anyone else who thought that eat their words. She was going to graduate and climb the ranks to Jounin and laugh at anyone who tried to stop her. It was just a spark, weak and useless at the moment, but could one day turn into a mighty blaze. After all, those who build themselves from nothing are often the most terrifying of all. Chapter 2, Mother really does know best. Mabuki Harano was no fool. She may be a civilian, but you learned a thing or two when living in a hidden village and having a kunoichi in training under your roof. When her daughter came home from school with red eyes and clenched fists, she knew something was wrong. Did something happen today, sweetie? She asked. You look a little down. There was a slight pause as Sakura hung up her bag, retrieving the empty lunch kit from inside. We had a sparring day today, she said eventually. Taijutsu only. That explained her knees, but something told Mabuki that there was more to the story. It would be far from the first time that her daughter had come home frustrated and angry after school, ranting about how if they wanted her to meet their expectations then they should give her the same attention they did the clan kids. It grated Mabuki that her precious child was being ignored and disregarded, and had gone to the school on more than one occasion to confront those in charge about it. Unfortunately, all she had gotten was a patronizing explanation that if Sakura can't handle it, then it would be for the best that she dropped out of the academy and there is tutoring available if she's falling behind. Not like the bullying her daughter was suffering didn't have anything to do with becoming a shinobi. Mabuki waited patiently for Sakura to continue. Irika-sensei put me against Sasuke. Sakura seemed to curl into herself, her small frame tucking itself into the corner of the sofa. That matchup was not even remotely fair. Mabuki knew from Sakura's numerous times gushing about the boy, that he was the top of their class in practical, and second in theory. Not to mention a child of one of the most powerful clans in Konoha. She took a seat next to Sakura. How did it go? Small hands curled into fists. It wasn't a long fight, Sakura admitted. But I managed to hit him. Twice. Pride swelled in Mabuki's chest. And then he said I wasn't a threat. And that I was going to be cannon fodder. Sakura's voice rose in anger. I know he doesn't like me, but he was just . She made a wordless noise of frustration. Sakura may have been training to be a shinobi, a glorified killer for her country, but she was still a child, still only 11 years old. So Mabuki didn't think twice about wrapping her arms around her daughter. He never said that about anyone else. Sakura mumbled into her shoulder. Not even Naruto, who isn't even there half the time. Just me. Mabuki was not an angry woman. She had her moments of course, but as a whole, she was a very level-headed individual. With Sakura being so young and Kaizashi's head always in the clouds, someone needed to be. This however, made her blood boil. There was no excuse for the words he had spat. Absolutely none. She may not have fought in the war, but she had seen its consequences, seen death hang over her home more than once. Mabuki knew that those seen as lesser, almost always clanless shinobi were thrown to the dogs so that those deemed more important could survive. To have her daughter, her only child, compared to those masses of dead, made her want to track down the boy and his parents and give them a talking to they would never forget. Mabuki may be a civilian, but she still had a spine, and she would not tolerate someone speaking to her child in that way. I ran away after. Sakura admitted. Class was almost over anyway, and I just couldn't stay. It was clear where the red eyes had come from. Taking a deep breath, Mabuki squeezed Sakura tightly. You did the right thing in removing yourself from the situation. You deserve respect and I am so proud of you. The tension in Sakura's shoulders melted away. It would be one thing if I was annoying him, but we didn't get to choose our sparring partners. It was for class. And he still. Mabuki petted her hair. There is no excuse for the things he said, she said softly. It doesn't matter if he was angry, or embarrassed, or upset. He purposely hurt you and clearly does not regret it? Sakura relaxed further into her hold. I also hope you no longer have a crush on him. Mabuki continued. Her daughter was smart, but young. If this was about to become unhealthy, she was going to nip it at the bud. I don't. She said firmly. There was a slight pause. I kind of want to punch him in the face. Sakura admitted. A snort escaped Mabuki. Well, I don't condone solving interpersonal conflicts with violence, but if you were to do so, I wouldn't ground you. Just this once. And maybe they would get ice cream in celebration. Lasting relationships are built on mutual care and respect, and from what you're telling me, he checks off neither boxes. She pressed a kiss to Sakura's forehead. You deserve so much better than someone who hurt you like this. I know, Sakura said quietly. And I'm going to prove him wrong. This was the same tone she'd used when she'd first gone to Kaisashi and Mabuki and told them she wanted to enter the academy. Determination brimming from every pore. Slowly, Sakura shook herself of her mother's grip and sat up, spine straight and unyielding. I am going to get better. She said firmly. I am going to train and read and read and read until I know everything backwards. I am going to show all of them what it means to be a civilian-born kunoichi. Mabuki loved her daughter, and she knew that one day, her baby would blossom into someone truly terrifying. Sticking to her new goal was both harder and easier than Sakura anticipated. Normally, she arrived at school early and tried to get a seat close to Suzuki before reviewing her notes. It was a good way to solidify her knowledge and make sure she wouldn't be outperformed in theory. She almost started walking to her usual spot before catching herself and going in the opposite direction. There were several seats open, but many people she did not want to be next to. She was safe from Ino and the other fangirls since she was nowhere near Suzuki, but that still left people like Naruto and Kiba who were far from ideal to be beside. Eventually, she slid into a seat in between Shino and Hinata in the second last row. Can I sit here? She questioned. Hinata gave her a timid smile and nodded. I hope you're feeling better today. Ever the diplomat. Not that Sakura wanted to rehash yesterday's events. And now that Hinata mentioned it, she did feel lighter, almost. A weight she hadn't realized had been pressing down on her had been lifted. I am, thank you. And even if it had been replaced by. She's civilian born, the most she'll ever amount of is a paper chunin, and that's if she even graduates. A fire burning in her core. You're welcome. On the other side, Shino pushed up his glasses. I have no adverse feelings to you sitting there. Why? Because you are always quiet during lessons and will likely not disrupt my concentration. Coming from him, that was practically a glowing review. Not long after, Irika came in and yelled for silence. If he noticed the changes in seating, which of course he did, he may have been a teacher but he was a shinobi, he didn't say anything. The morning was not terrible. Everyone has apparently moved on from yesterday's drama, for which Sakura was grateful. She knew the talk with her mother had helped a lot, but part of her still ached. Cannon fodder. Forcefully pushing the thought out of her mind, she turned to Hinata once more. Would you like to eat together? She asked. Hinata blinked before smiling once more. Tea, that sounds good. Lunch with Hinata was different. Neither of them were particularly loud, and they'd never really hung out before, but it was a nice companionable silence. As class was let out for the day, Sakura stayed behind. Irika-sensei, is it possible for me to use the school training grounds after hours? She questioned. I can't reserve any on my own, and don't have anyone to do it for me. You could only reserve a training ground if you were at least a genin. She'd overheard several of her classmates say that their parents did it for them, or if they were clan kids, had grounds in their compounds. Someone like her had no chance, especially since asking a shinobi outside of school would likely result in dismissal at best. Irika blinked. Today? You know the tutoring hours are Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Irritation bubbled in her stomach. I don't want to take the tutor's attention away when I'm not failing. I just really want to get more practice in. She explained. Irika paused for a moment. That should be fine, just make sure to let at least one teacher know when you're planning on using them. Some other shinobi like to train there, and it wouldn't be good for you to get caught in that. She tried to not feel insulted. She knew that he was saying it because she hadn't even graduated yet, and of course real shinobi could potentially hurt her, but it stung. She couldn't help but feel that if it were someone else, anyone else, he wouldn't have given the same warning. Sakura didn't have anyone to spar with, so she worked on her shuriken and kunai throwing as well as her katas. She remembered the instructions of her teachers and does the repetitions again and again and again. Her muscles ached from the extra exertion, unused to the added exercise, but she refused to let that stop her. Every time she felt like giving up, she forced herself to remember. Cannon fodder. Paper chuyunin. Her wrist snapped, sending the shuriken flying. It hit 3 inches from the bullseye. It had been 2 weeks since her fight with Suzuki, and she wondered if she was kidding herself. There had been only microscopic improvements in her technique despite spending almost twice the amount of time she used to on the movements. Her mother had reminded her to be patient, and that changes wouldn't happen overnight, but with every slightly off throw, every mediocre kata, she couldn't help but think they were right about her. While Suzuki had been the most obvious in his disdain, talking in front of the teacher like it was nothing, like he never had to worry about consequences, he was far from the only one who had spoken to her like that. It had been better when there were other civilian-born kids, the teasing had been spread out more. Despite the fact that the clanless kids who still had shinobi family were still seen as less than the clan kids, there wasn't the same silent sense of camaraderie. No, most of the time they were just glad there was someone lower on the food chain. The sound of heavy hoof steps broke Sakura from her musings. It was a large boar, thick-bodied with long tusks and a mean look in its beady little eyes. And it was heading right for her. Sakura's mouth went dry as her heart began thudding painfully loud in her chest. She should be braver than this. Shinobi didn't get scared by wild animals, yet here she was, practically shaking. Running will make it chase you, and it's definitely faster. Sakura swallowed. I need to get up a tree, but how to stall it? Her hand wrapped around the hilt of a kunai, knowing that it was unlikely that she'd have the strength to break through the boar's thick skin, and that even if she did, it wouldn't amount to much damage. The boar closed the distance between them. Sakura had never been gladder that Irika had drilled them in dodging, because she very narrowly escaped the boar's tusks as it ran right past where she just stood, going headfirst into a thick gathering of bushes. Not wasting a second, she quickly grabbed the branches of the nearest tree and pulled herself up, climbing as quickly as her trembling hands would allow her. The boar let out a deep roar, aggressively tearing through the bushes in an attempt to free itself. Sakura saw the snake an instant before it struck, teeth sinking deep into the boar's leg. It let out a pained noise, kicking back its legs in an attempt to dislodge the snake. The boar thrashed wildly, its efforts slowly becoming weaker and weaker until it fell limp to the ground. The black snake, which she now recognized as a mambushi, slithered away calmly, disappearing back into the thick foliage. The boar must have startled it when it had been thrashing around in the bushes, and the snake had bitten in self-defense and surprise. Sakura carefully dropped back to the ground. She hadn't even touched it, yet there it lay, dead, despite the fact that it was naturally larger and more powerful than both her and the snake. It was then that it dawned on her. Poison. Because poison didn't care whether you were bigger or stronger or would win in a fair fight. It didn't care if you had a special bloodline limit or extra training. It killed you all the same. Chapter 3, and so she learned. Sakura approached her research on poisons with a single-minded intensity that surprised even her. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't need to be special to learn and use them, she didn't need to be anything but a bookworm with a library card. For someone who had seen time and time again the advantages of those around her had, the idea of something so easily accessible yet useful made her itch for more knowledge. She started simple. The number of books she was able to access compared to the ones in the Konoha library made her grit her teeth, But as always, she worked with what she had. As an academy student, her clearance was barely above that of a civilian, barring her from even touching that majority of the scrolls and books. Not for lack of trying. She was not at all ashamed to admit that she had attempted to sneak into the areas restricted to her on more than one occasion. She'd stopped after they threatened to ban her from the library entirely, but she would never regret her actions in the pursuit of knowledge. Still, it was easy enough to find a book on plants. There weren't any that she could access that directly spoke of poisons, but if she was able to identify the plants she could begin collecting her own. It was enough. It would have to be. Sakura only had 3 months until the graduation test, and when she passed, she'd be placed on a genin team. It was likely that she'd be put on a team with 2 other clanless kids, seeing as she didn't have any specialization like some of the others. So every day after she trained in the back of the academy, she visited the library. She read and read, sometimes not moving for hours at a time as she consumed scroll after scroll, book after book. She memorized every plant in Fire Country and began on those in Suna, Iwa, Kiri, Kumo from anywhere and everywhere if she could get her hands on it. She studied venomous animals like the snake she saw and learned where they live and what they look like. She read because it's what she was good at. She read and she learned. Sorry Sakura, my father doesn't want me to train with you. Sakura resisted the urge to scowl, instead giving a nod to Hinata. I understand. Thanks for asking. It wasn't Hinata's fault her family wouldn't allow them to train together, so there was no use in being angry at her. After more than a month of practice, it had come to Sakura's attention that as necessary as drilling in movements like throwing kunao and shuriken, there was only so much solo practice could do. She didn't have anyone to train with outside of school, so she'd asked the one person she'd felt she could comfortably say was a friend. Sakura should have known better. Hinata was the Hyuga heiress after all. Why would they want to sully their clan's reputation by having her train with a clanless civilian-born girl? Maybe if she kept ignoring the pain and rage bundled in her chest, it would go away. She didn't exactly have many options, and the only other person she even talked to semi-regularly was Shino. Pushed up his glasses, posture straight and stoic as he stared at the board Irika was writing on. Him. I really need someone to spar with. So Sakura steeled herself, and resolved to ask him after class. It had been over a month since her disastrous fight with Suzuki and her conversation with her mother. She hadn't realized how much she'd paid attention to him until she was actively trying to stop. Even now she would occasionally find herself going to sit beside him out of habit, or watching the back of his head instead of paying attention to Irika. Sakura forced herself to stop every time. It was unexpectedly freeing to not have to constantly wonder what he was doing and focus on herself. There was also the added benefit of the other girls not bothering her as much, now that she wasn't a love rival. Even Ino barely looked in her direction. She wasn't sure if she was relieved or hurt with being so easily forgotten. The end of the school day was anticlimactic, with Irika merely reminding them to finish their homework by the end of the week. Quickly packing as to not lose her target, Sakura turned to Shino. Hey, Shino. Can I ask you to do me a favor? He paused. That depends on the favor. Why? Because I do not wish to promise something and then not deliver. It's nothing big, she assured him, except it was, for her anyway. I just need someone to spar with outside of school, and was wondering if you would mind practicing with me. Shino's brow furrowed. Sakura tried not to be disappointed. Why would his answer be any different from Hinata's? She talked to him even less often and they could barely be considered friends. It was fine. She'd figure something. That is acceptable. Why? Because we are not often paired up in class and it would be a useful experience. Wait, what? She blinked hard. You're agreeing to spar with me? Shino tilted his head. Yes, was my response not clear? Sakura fought the urge to squeal in joy. She didn't want to scare Shino off as she shook her head. Sorry. I just wasn't expecting you to agree. He continued staring at her. Would you be able to join me today? Or is another time better? She couldn't believe her luck. Today is acceptable. Why? Because I have no other engagements. Where do you regularly train? Sakura hunched into herself slightly. I just use the school grounds. His brow furrowed. Those are frequently in use with little privacy. Why would you train there? Sakura pushed down a wave of anger and shame. It's not exactly like civilian-borns have a lot of places to train. She said, the words coming out sharper than she wanted them to. I don't have any clan grounds and I can't reserve any other training areas until I make genin. She doesn't know what she'd do if he mocked her, but it will be violent and loud and embarrassing. I apologize. Why? Because it seems my question has upset you. I was unaware of your lack of resources. She blinked in surprise. Oh, it's fine. She attempted a smile. Would you like to come to my clan compound to train? He questioned. I may not be able to allow you in if you are alone, but if I accompany you to train, no one should take issue with it. Her. Train at a clan compound with the best grounds? Hell yes. Sakura's excitement turned into anxiety as they neared the compound. Are you sure your family would be okay with this? She asked. I thought that most clans don't like people just coming in. She would much rather be denied right away than be kicked out once they got in. She wasn't sure she'd be able to handle the humiliation. Shino glanced at her. They should have no complaints. He responded. Why? Because I invited you. His words did little to quell the nerves fluttering in her stomach. They only saw two people on their way to the training grounds, for which Sakura was grateful. There had been a lanky man carrying an armful of scrolls, and an old woman sitting on her porch, cutting an apple and putting a piece to the side for the insects around her. Both had been wearing similar clothing to Shino, large, high-collared coats and tinted glasses. Sakura tried not to be bitter as she saw the pristine state the training area was in. Where do you want to start? She lost. A lot. Even though close combat wasn't Shino's specialty, he could still beat her in plain taijutsu, and she had bruises on top of bruises after the first training session. He was nicer about it than Sasuke had ever been about his victories. Though she hadn't had the courage to ask if this was just a one-off, Shino invited her to come again on Thursday. Thus began their routine. Sakura still trained solo most days, but now twice a week she walked to the RWBY compound with Shino and sparred with him. They didn't often fight all out, or using all of their abilities, but they didn't need to. Besides, it was good practice for if they ever were handicapped in some way. She hadn't realized it before, but Shino was much more awkward than she'd originally thought. Sakura had assumed his loner nature was due to choice, but it became clear the more time she spent with him that he wasn't very good at talking to people. He was a strange mixture of sure of his logic, and unsure of the people around him. It was around the third week of their sparring when someone took notice. Sakura hadn't realized he was there, but in her defense she was much more focused on the barrage of Konao Shino had just sent flying at her. She managed to avoid being cut, but at the expense of several bruises on her arms and knees that she would no doubt feel later. Scooping up a handful of dirt, she tossed it in his eyes before lunging with Konao in hand. He managed to twist himself out of the way, but she switched her arm's trajectory and hit his shoulder joint with the butt of her blade, causing him to stumble. Unfortunately, it also made her lose her balance. They separated and regrouped. Well fought. Sakura was not at all proud of the squeak she let out as she whipped her head towards the unknown voice. A tall man with spiky black hair and a cream-colored coat stood several feet to the side, his features familiar for a reason she can't place. Shino straightened from his stance, as pleased as she'd ever seen him look. Father. Sakura, who had been in the process of relaxing her posture, stiffened. This was Shino's dad? As in, the head of the RWBY clan? Scrambling to remember the proper way to address him, she fell into a quick bow, suddenly 1,000 times more aware of her unkempt hair and filthy clothes. It wasn't surprising considering she'd been thrown to the ground more than once this afternoon, but it didn't make it any less embarrassing. It's nice to meet you, sir. She said politely, trying not to show how anxious she was. I'm Sakura Harano, one of Shino's classmates. Was that okay? Should she have waited for him to directly talk to her first? God, she hoped he didn't make them stop training together. It was nice while it lasted. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, he said. Shino has told us much about you. She smiled awkwardly. All good things, I hope. The RWBY were notoriously hard to read, but after spending so much time around Shino, she was pretty sure the minuscule upturn of his lips was a smile. At least, she hoped so. Is there something you needed, father? Shino questioned, and if she didn't know better she would have sworn the tips of his ears were red. You are usually busy with the fields this time of year. Shivi hummed. I've come to invite Sakura to dinner. He explained. I meant to do so earlier, but had come too late to catch you. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose. She said quickly, trying to think of a way out that wouldn't be rude. You wouldn't be imposing, he said. Why? Because I am inviting you. Is there a conflict timing with your family? Sakura very much wished there was. In reality, the day before her mother had warned her that she would be working late at the shop and her father wasn't due to be home for another 3 weeks. She could always lie, but Shino was looking at her as eagerly as he was capable of. He was helping her get better, and allowing her access to his clan training grounds. She could survive one family dinner if it made him happy. Nope. Both my parents are away from the house right now. Somehow, Shivi's gaze seemed approving. Then would you mind joining us for dinner? Please don't be a mistake, please don't be a mistake, please don't be a mistake. I would love to. Chapter 4, Dinner with the Family. Sakura doesn't know what she expected, but this wasn't it. Shino's house was large, branching off into several directions. There was an enormous dining area, and the roof was at least 30 feet up. Despite the size, however, the inside wasn't all that full. This area is for clan dinners or celebrations. Shino explained when she asked. We do not often use this area of the house. Shivi led them into a much cozier section portion of their home. There were books and plants littered everywhere, as well as pictures of the family. The kids should clean up for dinner. Sakura managed to surpass her second squeal of the day, turning to see a pale woman with dark brown hair. Why? Because the food is nearly ready and it is poor manners shed dirt on the table. Sakura very much wished she had a change of clothes, but was thankful nonetheless for the opportunity to make herself look slightly less like she'd been rolling around in the dirt. She had been, but that wasn't the point. This was her first impression on clan leaders, even if it was a simple dinner. If she messed up here, she could kiss any future help from the RWBY goodbye, no matter if she remained friends with Shino. After the bathroom door closed, she took off her shirt, shaking it out to the best of her ability. There wasn't nearly enough time to wash it, so she just did the same with her shorts. Sakura didn't have a brush on her, so she simply put her long hair in a braid in an attempt to hide its tangles, before scrubbing her arms and face with soap and water. When she looked in the mirror again, she was at least somewhat presentable. Come on Sakura, you're 12 years old. You can handle one dinner. Steeling herself, Sakura opened the door. Shivi did not know what to think of Shino's friend. She'd had no problem tussling with his son in the dirt, but had looked obviously uncomfortable with her appearance as soon he had made himself known. He'd been able to gather that she was a civilian-born academy student from his son's tales and was surprised at how close they seemed. While there were exceptions, most children, and even adult shinobi found the insects their clan hosted disturbing, their lack of visible emotions only making it worse. His wonderful wife glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. Well, Shiori knew him too well. I find it unlikely she's only friends with him out of a desire to garner more connections. As much as Shivi would like to believe Shino was able to form meaningful relationships with people who had no ulterior motive, he was a shinobi, and you never left that paranoia behind, even at home. Their fears were not unfounded. It would be far from the first time that those less fortunate had attempted to gain favor by becoming friends with their clan peers. It didn't happen as often with the RWBY, but it happened nonetheless. On paper, Sakura Harano fit the bill. Civilian-born, but talented and stubborn enough to stay en route to being a kunoichi despite her disadvantages. Despite that, Sakura showed very few signs of deception, her affection for Shino coming off clear as day. Someone looking for connections would have jumped at the chance to have dinner with the head of any clan, yet she'd only decided to after seeing how much Shino hoped she would. Shivi was glad. The RWBY had few allies and even fewer friends. Seeing his son with someone he would be able to trust eased his mind. The girl in question edged her way into the dining room, hair now swept into a braid and most of the dirt scrubbed from her skin. Is there anything I can help with? She asked. He saw an approving glint in Shiori's eyes. There are plates in the cupboard beside me. You may place them on the table. Shivi busied himself with seasoning the vegetables, handing the dish to a fresh-clothed Shino. There was a comfortable silence as the four of them worked together, and soon the table was set and the food was laid out. How was the academy? Shiori asked. You had a quiz today, didn't you? Shino nodded, taking a bite of the rice. It was to identify the different symptoms of poisons, as well as their potential cures. He explained. I am sure I answered everything correctly except the final bonus question. Oh, that was you. Sakura spoke up, looking considerably more cheered than before. There aren't really notable symptoms until it's almost too late, so most people who've been poisoned by it don't even realize. Unless you have an antidote or medic on hand, it's difficult to counteract compounds with it involved. It was somewhat surprising that she'd been able to answer the question while Shino had not. The RWBY were very familiar with plants as they were a part of the ecosystem their insects lived in. It wasn't something most academy students would know, as most of them focused on the flashier parts of shinobi training. Shino's brow furrowed. I do not recall that being in the notes. Sakura shrugged. I read it somewhere else. That's probably why it was a bonus question. Are you interested in poisons? Shivi questioned. Sakura glanced away. I've been doing some reading. She said shyly. I don't have a pre-made specialty like the clan kids or some of the shinobi-born ones, so I figured that I could focus on poison. You don't have to be special to use it. She didn't say and I'm not special, but she might as well have. There was a silence at the table, and Sakura internally cursed herself. Why would they care about what she was researching? Hopefully they didn't use that as a reason for why she wouldn't be able to train with Shino. Kami, she could already imagine it. You're looking into poisons to make up for the fact that you're not actually skilled? You clearly aren't good enough to train with Shino. Poisons take a lot of time to specialize in, so it is a good idea to get a head start. Shiori said with a nod. However, I recommend not experimenting until you have a teacher to supervise you. She let out a surprised laugh. Oh, Kami, no. I'm not stupid enough to do that. I've read enough of the potential side effects to put me off of even considering doing something like that. Tension she hadn't realized was there bled out of her shoulders. Shivi took a bite of a carrot. Are you able to preform the Academy 3? He questioned. Coming from anyone else, she might have been offended, but there was something about the way he was asking that didn't rouse her temper. He wasn't asking as though he expected she wouldn't be able to, but rather out of necessity for his following question. For all the socially awkward statements the RWBY made, she was coming to understand that they weren't asking to be rude. I can. She affirmed. Sakura is one of the best in our class at creating the henge. Shino chimed in. And has consistently been one of the first to pick up chakra exercises. Sakura blinked in surprise. She hadn't realized that he'd been paying attention. Despite the fact that it had gotten her harassed even more on the days the teachers praised her, it had been one of the only things that had kept her going when she contemplated leaving the academy. Shivi considered her, expression unreadable behind the high collar and tinted glasses. You do not have access to jutsu books or any other way to get techniques that aren't taught at the academy. It wasn't a question. Sakura shook her head anyway, unsure of where this was going. Would you like to have a piece of chakra paper? She froze. Did she want a piece of chakra paper? What kind of question was that? Of course she wanted one. Even if she wasn't able to begin learning any elemental jutsu until she graduated, she'd be able to start her research and have a head start. Yes. She blurted out. That yes. Please. Her cheeks were burning, and she resisted the urge to fidget under the collective gaze of the three RWBY. The majority of the food had been eaten, and now there were very few excuses she could use to look away. Come with me. Sakura had done her best not to gawk at the large house, but when they got to the library she wasn't able to contain herself. Shelves stacked to the ceiling, wall to wall and completely filled with books. It was fuller than the one she went to, books in pristine condition, and she'd be afraid to even touch one of them. Yet her fingers twitched with the urge to run a finger across their spine. And you'll never be able to read any of them. A nasty voice sneered in her head. Shivi had gone behind several shelves, instructing her to stay where she was. The lack of supervision made it even more tempting to take a look at just one book, just to see a glimpse. She resisted, not wanting to get on the RWBY's bad side. It turned out to be the right decision, as Shivi returned swiftly, holding a small square of paper. He wordlessly offered it to her. Sakura hesitated. Was it unfair that she found out her chakra natures before the other kids? She knew this was generally something the Jounin sensei would do for their genin. Unfair. Like how they get extra help at home. Like the better equipment they're just handed? Like their futures which they don't need to worry about? Her hand closed around the paper. It was smoother than she was expecting, as well as several times thicker than the type she used for school. Are you aware of how to use it? Shivi questioned. Sakura bit her lip. I just channel chakra into it, right? And it'll either burst into flame, crumble, be cut in half or get soggy. Shino tilted his head. Have you researched this before? She shrugged. I like to read. It's the only thing I'm good at. Taking a deep breath, she pushed a small amount of chakra into the paper. It immediately folded in her hand, the now wet parchment folding heavily before completely crumbling in her hand and onto the floor. Oh. It appears you have two chakra natures. Shivi said, just as unreadable as before. Earth is not exactly common, and I believe water is extremely rare for a fire country shinobi, despite the fact that our first Hokage had both. Sakura knew exactly why she had water nature and there was absolutely no way she was going to say anything about it. Water nature may be rare in fire country, but in water country it was all too common. Her father had been born in Kiri and moved to Konoha when he was in his early 20s. He didn't say much about his homeland, but she knew he had moved because the third Mizukage had been steadily making things worse, and it had been dangerous. Her father was no shinobi, but that didn't spare him from any of the harsh realities. Sakura had never been ashamed of her father or where he came from, and neither had her mother, but that didn't mean everyone was so understanding. I didn't know that. She lied. Thank you again for doing this. Shivi looked at her curiously. It was a pleasure. You are welcome in our home anytime. Sakura's heart warmed. Much later, Sakura was sitting alone in her bed, the sun having set long ago. You're being ridiculous. The sane part of her argued. It's a keki I genkai. The whole point of them is that they can't be done by people outside of the family. And yet. She stared at the old pot she had dragged into her room, and the oak seed that was resting in her palm. It wouldn't hurt to try, would it? Only she would know if she failed. Slowly, she dug into the dirt and placed the seed down. She reached inside for her chakra, the pool pitifully small, and pushed it into where the oak was. Grow. Chapter 5, Here lies the starting line. Sakura tried to contain her disappointment. It wasn't like you were expecting anything to happen anyway. The logical part of her reasoned. But something nagged in her mind, something that refused to let go. Why can't I do it? It whispered. Why is it considered a keki I genkai? Why? Why? Sakura had always been curious and had asked a lot of questions the way many kids did. Unlike other kids, she'd learned quickly what she wasn't allowed to ask and what made people uncomfortable. Don't ask about clan techniques or secrets and don't point out their weaknesses. Don't ask for deeper explanations about the subtle propaganda they fed to everyone. Why questions were particularly disliked, so she learned to keep her mouth shut and watch instead of ask. People often showed their true intentions rather than saying them, and Sakura had managed to avoid getting into trouble more than once by observing. There was no way she'd be able to ask about this, so she would just have to watch. Konoha wasn't built in a day, so it would make sense for her to not be able to use the Mokuton yet. The only way she would know is if she kept trying. She who ventures and achieves nothing had gained more than those who didn't dare. Kakashi glared at the folder in his hand, trying to mentally will it to burst aflame. If anyone other than the Hokage himself had not ordered this, he might have burned it himself. Not that he'd ever say it to his face, but the old man must have gone senile if he thought giving Kakashi a genin team was a good idea. One with the son of his sensei no less. He was tempted to just ignore the folders and wing it. Teaching kids couldn't be that hard, could it? He knew he had learned quickly as a child, so wouldn't he be able to show them a technique and then leave them to it? The higher-ups probably wouldn't let him get away with that. Kakashi let out a sigh, deciding to bite the bullet and finally opening the folder. Name, Suzuki Uchiha. Age, 12. Height, 148 centimeters. Weight, 42 kilograms. Rank, Academy student. Affiliation, Konoha. Clan, Uchiha. Immediate family, Fugaku Uchiha, Mikoto Uchiha, Itaki Uchiha. Blood type, AB. Combat classification, Ninjutsu. Combat ranking, 1st. Theoretical ranking, 2nd. Personality, ambitious. confident bordering on arrogant, antisocial. Additional notes, has shown to be hostile towards peers. Does not respect those he deems weaker than him. Kakashi wrinkled his nose. Placing him with an Uchiha was bad enough. Some of them still hated the fact that he had Obito's eye, no matter how many times it was explained to them that it was a gift, but they put him with one a near identical personality chart as his own had been when he'd graduated. These weren't the entire folders the village had on these kids, the full ones were filled with every minute detail and mannerism, but it was frowned upon for Jounin senseis to look at the full ones lest they develop too many preconceived notions of their students and didn't bother to get to know them. Stupid in Kakashi's opinion, but he really didn't want to read more than he had to. He put Sasuke's file down and picked up the one with the name Naruto imprinted on it, ignoring the pang in his heart. Name, Naruto Uzumaki. Age, 12. Height, 145 centimeters. Weight, 40 kilograms. Rank, Academy student. Affiliation, Konoha. Clan, Uzumaki. Immediate family, none. Blood type, B. Combat classification, Taijutsu. Combat ranking, 9th. Theoretical ranking, 32nd. Personality, exuberant. Eager to please and prove himself. Ambitious. Additional notes, dislikes and is unreceptive to any form of book learning. May cause trouble if he feels he is being ignored. It was easier to read the file than see him. The file was detached. Analytical. It made it easier to pretend the gaping hole in his chest didn't exist, pretend that the guilt wasn't still eating him alive. Pushing those thoughts aside, he opened the last folder. At least it can't get any worse. Name, Sakura Harano. Age, 12. Height, 150 centimeters. Weight, 37 kilograms. Rank, Academy student. Affiliation, Konoha. Clan, none. Immediate family, Mabuki Harano, Kaizashi Harano. Blood type, O. Combat classification, Genjutsu. Combat ranking, 11th. Theoretical ranking, 1st. Personality, reserved. Curious. Emotional. Additional notes, has a tendency to question orders. Civilian born. So not only did they place him with Naruto and an Uchiha attack his brother no less, but they also put him with a civilian born? It was like the Hokage was trying to kill him. Friend killer Kakashi finally meets his end, killed by his genin team. He mentally shook himself. Nothing he could do about this now. Sakura stared in shock, not quite believing what she was seeing. It was 2 weeks after she had first decided to experiment with the Mokuton, each attempt leading to the same result. Nothing. That was, until today, when she managed something completely unexpected. She'd been upset because she had lost every one of her sparring matches. It had felt that despite all her work she would never manage to catch up and that all her effort was useless. To make matters worse, she couldn't train with Shino because he had a clan meeting, and the school grounds were being used by the year below them for the entire week for survival training. By the time she'd returned home to an empty house, Sakura had practically been boiling with rage. She had tried to make it a habit to attempt the Mokuton 3 times a day. Once before she sent to school, once when she returned from it, and once before she went to bed. That way she was trying multiple times a day, but not too many in a row, so she was less likely to get frustrated. Not wanting to break the habit despite her anger, Sakura had sat down next to the pot and pushed chakra into the seed a little more aggressively than she usually did, paying less attention to how much she'd put in it as well. The seed exploded. The shock had cut through her rage, leaving her gaping and frozen. This wasn't what she'd been trying to do, not by a long shot, but it was something. Proved that her attempts weren't completely in vain, proved that it was possible. Maybe. She repeated the process 4 more times to make sure it wasn't a fluke, and felt lightheaded with giddiness. Progress. Now if she could only find a way to do something other than make it explode. Ino was furious, and she wasn't sure why. That was actually a lie. She knew exactly why she was mad, but she'd rather swear off boys than admit it. You know, I think you stare at her as much as Sasuke these days. Ino whipped her head around to glare at Shikamaru. I do not, she said indignantly. Besides, if I were, it would only be to gawk at her huge forehead. The words came easily, rehearsed and with less bite than they'd had before. It had been easy when Sakura had been her love rival, easy still when they fought for top marks and traded insults in equal measure. But ever since her sparring match with Sasuke, Sakura had retreated into herself, barely engaging with anyone. So now the end of their friendship meant nothing? Their rivalry that had been the whole reason for them splitting up was tossed aside so casually it made Ino's blood boil, because it made her feel like Sakura had tossed aside her as well. Had she ever meant anything to Sakura? Her former rival now spent all her time with Hinata and Shino of all people, so what was she supposed to think? Shikamaru glanced at her with one eyebrow raised, clearly not buying anything she'd said. It was infuriating how easily he could read her, but it worked out in the end. She didn't need to say much for him to understand what she meant, and she never needed to worry about him getting offended over things she didn't mean. Not that the lazy moron ever really got offended over anything. I thought you'd be happy, Shuji chimed in, stuffing a handful of chips in his mouth. You were always complaining about her liking Sasuke before. And she should be happy, so why wasn't she? You know, if you went up and talked to her, I don't think she would ignore you. Shikamaru said, leaning back in his chair. You were friends for a long time, I'm sure you could be again. Ino scoffed. Why would I ever want to be friends with someone with that big of a forehead? Her words carried over the class, easily loud enough that everyone could hear. Sakura glanced up, green eyes flashing with hurt before hardening. She then very purposely turned her back on Ino and towards Shino, not once glancing back. Have you completely forgotten about me? I'm Sakura nearly jumped out of her skin at the booming voice, the water affinity scroll that she'd managed to weasel out of Irika falling to the ground. Mabuki looked up from her place at the dinner table, thread still between her teeth yet managing to pull off a distinctly unimpressed look. Before she knew it, Sakura was scooped into a bear hug as Kaisashi plucked her right off the couch, her feet dangling in the air. Dad. She squirmed in his hold so she could properly get her arms around him. You're back. He ruffled her hair. That I am. I see you're still devouring books. What are you reading this time? He froze. Sakura followed his gaze to the scroll she had been reading, nerves she hadn't realized existed bubbling up. I found out my chakra affinities while you were gone. She said awkwardly, avoiding his gaze. I got water and earth. Her father may not be a shinobi, but he wasn't stupid, and he understood the significance well enough. She wasn't ashamed of it or him, she wasn't, but she understood what it could mean for her future and the way others treated her. His gaze softened. Just like your old man, huh? He rested his hand on her shoulder, squeezing reassuringly. Sakura smiled up at him, attempting to swallow the lump in her throat. Yeah. She said, her voice cracking. Yeah, I am. Mabuki gently cleared her throat. I'm not in the mood to cook, and doubt you are either after your trip. How about we eat out tonight as a treat? Kaisashi grinned. Sounds perfect. How about that place near your work? They have amazing dumplings. You and your dumplings. Mabuki rolled her eyes, setting down her needle. But I suppose since you just got back, you get to pick. With a grin, Kaisashi sidled next to Mabuki, kissing her on the cheek. You're the best. She put on a mock stern look. And don't you forget it? The three of them fell into a fit of laughter. Sakura waited until Mabuki went to their bedroom to change before turning to Kaisashi once more. Would you tell me about Kiri? She questioned. There isn't much that doesn't seem biased in the library, and she took a deep breath. And I really want to know. He didn't often talk of his homeland, the times he did were either littered with old fear and bitterness, or wistful fondness. It wasn't like he completely ignored where he was from, but despite the culture aspects he had taught her, Sakura still didn't know as much as she'd like to. It might even help with her elemental jutsu, seeing as water nature would be much more common in Kiri. He surveyed her, uncharacteristically silent. His hand had fallen to the compass at his waist. It was an old, worn thing, with waves carved into the metal on the side. She knew it was one of the few things he still had from his family in Kirigakure. A small, sad smile broke out across his expression. Of course. He said tenderly. What would you like to know? Irika brought his hand down, signaling for the two students in front of him to begin the match. Start. Ami immediately lunged for Sakura, arm outstretched as she aimed for her face. Sakura sidestepped the attack, causing Ami to stumble enough so that she could launch an attack of her own. The elbow that connected was well placed and effective. Sakura retreated slightly, causing the two girls to begin circling on another, Ami's expression furious yet undeniably wary. The next time they clashed, Ami managed to shove the Sakura to the ground, fighting to keep her mediocrely executed pin in place. "Why don't you just give up?" Ami sneered. "Not like someone with that big of a forehead will ever amount to anything." Normally Irika would scold her, but verbal warfare was a part of shinobi battles, and real enemies would be much crueler than this playground teasing. Sakura rammed her forehead into Ami's nose, a loud crack ringing throughout the training field. From there she flipped their positions and placed an arm on Ami's throat. "My forehead is actually quite useful," she said triumphantly. Match over. Sakura is the winner. To his knowledge this was the first time Sakura had ever beaten Ami in a spar of any kind. "You broke my nose," Ami cried out, scrambling to her feet. Sakura stood taller, a proud smile dancing across her lips. Yes I did." If he didn't have to set a good example, Irika would have laughed. The day Sakura had been both dreading and wishing for had finally arrived. Exam day. Today was the day that she would either graduate the academy or be forced to stay behind a year. The latter was not an option. She made her way over to the pot on her windowsill, plucking a new seed from the box she kept them in. Sakura had been forced to start collecting them now that she was consistently exploding them. She was just glad it didn't make much noise. Her mother would have her head if she had to hear a loud bang on top of her father's antics. Despite her training, Sakura still didn't have much chakra to spare, and seeing as this was exam day, she did not want to be running low. So instead of pushing the usual amount, she gently let her chakra flow into the seed, tightly controlling how much she was using as to not let any go to waste. Time seemed to slow as an oak sprout just barely pushed itself out of the dirt. It was tiny really, could barely even be considered a sprout, but it was there. She did that. Her. A civilian-born nobody had just replicated the Mokutan. The supposed Keki Genkai that the first Hokage had had. Oh Kami, she was going to faint. Sakura. If you don't get going you're going to be late. Crap. The exam. And that's where we'll leave off for this episode. Thanks a ton for listening along with me. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you'll know when new episodes drop. I look forward to seeing you in the comments section. Ciao for now, lovelies.